A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hello, Herman and Corn. So the war here in Israel with Iran is ongoing. We're in a relatives who has a nice TV, and when we're not in the mamad, we're currently in the safe room, so you might hear the siren go off shortly. We've just got the warning, you've got a few minutes. But between these alerts, when we can go back to the living room, kind of a surreal situation, there is a TV. And it's one of these Samsung TVs. They have an OS called Tizen, I think, and it's kind of a bit locked down. But I'm wondering for options you might recommend for streaming from your devices onto a TV. So let's say that I have a laptop, and as you know, I'm running Ubuntu Linux. The rule, I guess, is that you're always going to get the best performance using a wire. So wired HDMI into the TV, carry your sound that way. But there are also these, you can use Chromecast, you can use wireless dongles, dedicated HDMI receiver transmitters that are going to send the video and audio signal wirelessly over the air. I guess I'd like to know, Herman and then there's also DLNA. There's different protocols that can be used over the air, and of course we have wired as well. So let's say, Herman and Corn, that you wanted to, two questions really. Among these wireless options, what is the difference? Like, is it better to use a HDMI plug-in transmitter receiver pair than to use, let's say, Chromecast, if it's available? And the second question is, if you wanted to, is it viable to go, let's say we're talking about a 6-meter apartment range and we're using HDMI, is that bypassing the local area network? Is that bypassing Wi-Fi for that jump, as opposed to Chromecast, which is clearly using the wireless network to transmit between devices? And if so, is there any significant difference in workable range between a HDMI pair and between something that piggybacks on the Wi-Fi network? I'm guessing that if the Wi-Fi is congested at 2.4 especially, that there might be a big advantage in using the HDMI pair. Question 2, Herman and Corn, if you wanted to have an elegant setup in your living room in which the HDMI port could maybe be spooled out of the wall or something, or from a little stand-in, and then whoever had a laptop could just kind of connect that way. I'm wondering, from that design standpoint, are there any options? Because I like the HDMI method a lot, but as you know, with Ezra, who's 8 months and crawling and grabbing at any cable, we're a lot more cautious about stuff like trip hazards and something that can be bitten into. And anyway, it just looks kind of ugly to have a big long cable running across the living room. So I'm curious to know if there's any products you could recommend to tidy up in that respect as well. Herman and Corn, let's talk about wireless smart TV streaming and your recommendations for on the technical level and on the product level. Over to you two.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. We are coming to you from Jerusalem today, and honestly, the atmosphere here continues to be quite heavy. Our housemate Daniel is actually out visiting relatives right now, and as he mentioned in his message, the reality of sirens and the ongoing conflict is something people here are still navigating every day. It is a surreal thing to be talking about tech specs and cable management while your friend is timing his living room visits between air raid alerts. But that is the resilience of life here in March of 2026. You keep moving forward, you keep solving problems.
It really is, Corn. Herman Poppleberry here, by the way, and Daniel is in that classic situation where you are stuck in a temporary spot. You have got a nice screen, but you are trying to make it work with your own gear. In this case, he is dealing with a Samsung TV running Tizen OS and his trusty Ubuntu Linux laptop. Plus, he has got little Ezra crawling around now, which changes the engineering requirements of a living room significantly. You cannot just have a tripwire of an HDMI cable running across the floor when you have an 8-month-old on the move.
It is a safety issue as much as an aesthetic one. So today we are diving into the world of wireless display protocols, the physics of wireless HDMI, and how to actually get a Linux machine to talk to a proprietary television ecosystem like Samsung's without losing your mind or tripping a baby.
It is a great prompt because it touches on that friction between open source systems and closed garden smart TVs. Samsung has been very successful with Tizen, but it is not always the most welcoming host for a random Linux distro. We should start with the wireless options Daniel mentioned, Chromecast, DLNA, and those wireless HDMI pairs. They all solve the same problem, but the underlying plumbing is completely different.
Let's start with DLNA, because that is often the first thing people stumble across. It stands for Digital Living Network Alliance. It is an older standard, but it is still baked into almost every smart TV, including Samsung's latest 2026 models. Herman, how does that actually function compared to something like a screen mirror?
So, DLNA is not really a screen mirroring protocol. It is more of a media sharing protocol. Think of it like a server and a client. Your Ubuntu laptop acts as the server, usually using something like Rigel or the built-in GNOME media sharing settings, telling the TV, hey, I have this video file sitting on my hard drive, here is the link to it. The TV then uses its own internal processor and its own video player app to pull that file over the local network and decode it.
So the laptop isn't doing the heavy lifting of rendering the video.
The laptop is just serving the bits. The upside is that it is very efficient. You aren't burning battery re-encoding your desktop into a video stream. The downside is that you can only play specific files. You can't mirror your browser, you can't show a presentation, and you certainly can't play a game. You are limited to what the Samsung TV's built-in player can handle. For Daniel's needs, it is likely too restrictive.
Right, he probably wants to see his whole desktop or at least a browser window. That brings us to Chromecast. Now, Google's Cast protocol is proprietary, but it is ubiquitous. Samsung TVs don't typically have Chromecast built in, though. They usually prefer their own SmartView or Miracast systems.
That is the big catch. Most Samsung TVs rely on Miracast for screen mirroring. Now, on the Linux side, Miracast has been a bit of a white whale for a long time. There is a project called GNOME Network Displays that tries to implement this using the Wi-Fi Direct standard. On Ubuntu 24.04 and 25.10, it has become much more stable, but it still requires your Wi-Fi card to support P2P connections. If Daniel wants to use Chromecast specifically, he would definitely need a physical Chromecast dongle plugged into the Samsung TV.
And if he does that, Ubuntu actually handles it pretty well through the Chromium browser or the Cast to TV GNOME extension. You can cast a tab or even your entire desktop via Pipewire. But we have to talk about the network aspect. All of these solutions, DLNA, Chromecast, Miracast, they all live on your Wi-Fi network. They are competing for bandwidth with every other device in the house.
And that is a huge point, Corn. Especially in a crowded apartment building or a house with lots of relatives staying over, that 2.4 GHz or even the 5 GHz band can get congested fast. When you are streaming video over Wi-Fi, you are dealing with latency and jitter. If the neighbor turns on their microwave or everyone starts scrolling social media, your frame rate drops or the audio desyncs. This is where those wireless HDMI transmitter and receiver pairs come in. They are a completely different beast.
This is the part of Daniel's question I found most interesting. He asked if wireless HDMI pairs bypass the Wi-Fi network. The short answer is yes, absolutely. But the technical reason why is fascinating. Herman, walk us through how those hardware pairs actually talk to each other.
Most high-quality wireless HDMI kits, like those from companies like Nereus or IO-Gear, use a technology called wireless HD, or a proprietary implementation of WHDI. The key difference is that they often operate on the 60 GHz frequency band. To put that in perspective, your standard Wi-Fi is at 2.4 or 5 GHz. 60 GHz is way up there in the millimeter wave spectrum.
Which means it has massive bandwidth but very little wall-penetrating power, right?
Precisely. It is essentially line of sight. But because it is on such a high frequency, it doesn't interfere with your Wi-Fi at all. It is like having a dedicated, invisible high-speed pipe just between the laptop and the TV. It is not using your router. It is a point-to-point connection. This is why the latency is so much lower, often less than 1 millisecond. You can actually use a mouse or even play some casual games on a wireless HDMI setup without that sluggish, floaty feeling you get with Chromecast.
So, for Daniel, if he is in a house where the Wi-Fi might be under strain from a lot of people being home, the wireless HDMI pair is a much more robust solution. It is effectively a virtual cable. You plug the transmitter into the laptop's HDMI port and the receiver into the TV's port. To the Ubuntu OS, it just looks like a standard second monitor. No drivers, no weird GNOME extensions, no fighting with Tizen OS. It just works.
And that is a huge win for a Linux user. We love things that follow standards and don't require proprietary middleware. But we should mention the range. Daniel asked about the differences in workable range. If you are using a 60 GHz system, you are looking at maybe 10 to 15 meters, and that is without any thick walls in the way. If you step into another room, the signal will likely drop entirely.
Whereas a network-based solution like Chromecast or DLNA works as long as both devices can see the router. You could be in the kitchen and cast to the living room TV. But for Daniel's specific scenario, 6 meters away in the same room, the wireless HDMI pair is well within its sweet spot.
There are also some wireless HDMI kits that use the 5 GHz band, similar to Wi-Fi, but they use a dedicated channel and their own compression algorithms. Those can sometimes go through a wall or two, but you sacrifice some of that ultra-low latency. Given that he is in a 6-meter apartment range, the 60 GHz models are the gold standard for quality.
Now, let's pivot to the physical side of this. Daniel is worried about little Ezra. An 8-month-old is basically a heat-seeking missile for cables. Even if you use a wireless HDMI kit, you still have a transmitter hanging off the laptop. If that laptop is on a coffee table, you still have a power cable for the laptop, and potentially a cable for the transmitter.
This is where the engineering of a safe living room comes in. If Daniel wants to stick with a physical HDMI cable for the absolute best reliability, which, let's be honest, we often advocate for, he needs a way to make that cable invisible or at least inaccessible to a baby. We actually touched on some similar cable length dilemmas back in episode 447, but the baby safety angle adds a new layer of urgency.
For a truly elegant and safe setup, I think he should look into D-line decorative trunking or overflow cord protectors. These are those rubberized, sloped ramps that you can stick to the floor. They are designed to be trip-proof, and more importantly, they are usually tough enough that a baby can't bite through them or pull the cable out. You can get them in colors that match the flooring, like wood grain or gray, so they don't look like an industrial yellow speed bump in your relative's living room.
That is a good, practical move. Another option, if the furniture layout allows it, is using a retractable HDMI spool. There are products designed specifically for conference rooms where the cable pulls out from a weighted base and then zips back in when you are done. If he sets that up on a side table next to where he sits with his laptop, the cable is only active and exposed when he is actually using it. The rest of the time, it is tucked away.
But even better, if he's staying there for a while, he could look at flat HDMI cables. These are much easier to run under a rug or along a baseboard using simple adhesive clips. If you run a flat white HDMI cable along the top of a white baseboard, it virtually disappears. You can use some gaffer tape, the good stuff that doesn't leave residue, to secure it to the floor where it has to cross a gap. Gaffer tape is a lifesaver for temporary but safe cable runs.
It really is. And for the laptop end of things, I'd suggest a small docking station that stays put. If he has a dedicated spot where he uses the laptop, he can cable manage everything to that dock. The power, the HDMI, maybe even a wired Ethernet for the best speeds. Then, when he sits down, he just plugs in one USB-C cable. It reduces the spaghetti factor significantly. If he uses a weighted cable holder on the table, that one cable won't even fall to the floor when he disconnects. It stays out of Ezra's reach.
I like that. It is about creating a tech zone that is isolated from the baby zone. But let's go back to the wireless HDMI recommendation for a second. If he goes that route, he can actually mount the receiver behind the TV so it is completely hidden. Most of those receivers can be powered by a USB port on the TV itself, so there are 0 new cables hanging down from the screen. That is a huge win for baby-proofing.
And the transmitter on the laptop side is often just a little dongle now. Some of them are even powered by the HDMI port itself or a tiny USB pigtail. If he uses that, there is literally no cable stretching across the room. It is the cleanest look possible. The only downside is the cost. A good wireless HDMI kit that doesn't lag is going to run you anywhere from $150 to $300.
It is an investment, but for the peace of mind of not having your 8-month-old yanking a $400 laptop off a table by its HDMI tail, it might be worth every penny.
Definitely. And since he is on Ubuntu, I should mention one more software-based trick. If he doesn't want to buy new hardware and the Samsung TV supports it, he can use a tool called VLC. Most people don't realize that the Linux version of VLC has a renderer menu. If your TV and laptop are on the same network, you can often just tell VLC to render the video directly to the Samsung TV. It uses the DLNA or Chromecast protocols under the hood, but it handles the transcoding very well. It is great for movies, though again, not for mirroring your whole screen.
That is a great tip for the free option. But I think for Daniel's specific situation, where he's dealing with potential network congestion and a very active baby, the wireless HDMI hardware is the most pro move. It treats the TV like a monitor, it keeps the floor clear, and it doesn't care if the house's Wi-Fi is being hammered by everyone watching the news.
I agree. And honestly, considering the geopolitical stress they are under right now, having one less thing to fiddle with, like fighting with Linux Wi-Fi drivers or Tizen OS app updates, is a huge win. You want your tech to be a source of relaxation, not a troubleshooting chore.
Well said. We should also touch on the elegant part of his request. If he does go with a wired setup, I am a big fan of braided cables. Not only do they look better, but they are often a bit more durable. And if you use a cable sleeve, one of those mesh tubes that zips or velcro shut, you can bundle your laptop charger and your HDMI cable into one neat snake. It is much less enticing for a baby than a bunch of thin, dangling wires.
And it is easier to see, so you are less likely to trip on it yourself. You know, we have talked about monitor standards in episode 783, and the physical connection is always the most reliable. But the long reach problem is real. If you are going more than 5 meters with a passive HDMI cable, you can start to see signal degradation or sparkles in the image. If Daniel goes the wired route for 6 meters, he should definitely get a high-quality active HDMI cable or one that is rated for ultra-high speed over that distance.
Great point. Active cables have a little chip in them to boost the signal. They are directional, so you have to make sure you plug the source end into the laptop and the display end into the TV. If you flip them, they won't work. But they allow for much longer runs without losing quality.
So, to summarize the technical differences for him, DLNA is for files, Chromecast is for tabs and apps, and wireless HDMI is a virtual cable. If he wants the It Just Works experience on Ubuntu, wireless HDMI is the king. If he wants the budget-friendly way, a long, high-quality flat HDMI cable hidden under a rug or along the baseboard is the runner-up.
And don't forget the cable management. Even a wireless setup has some wires. Use those adhesive clips and cable sleeves. Keeping things tidy isn't just about aesthetics when there is a baby involved. It is about safety. Ezra is at that age where everything goes in the mouth, and electricity and babies are a bad mix.
Safety first, especially in a household that is already dealing with so much. I hope that helps Daniel get his setup sorted. It is one small way to make a stressful situation a little more comfortable.
Definitely. And hey, if you are listening and you found these technical deep dives helpful, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your favorite podcast app or on Spotify. It really helps the show grow and helps other people find these niche solutions. We have been doing this for over 900 episodes now, and the community feedback is what keeps us going.
It really does. We love hearing how people are using this info in the real world. You can find our full archive of episodes at myweirdprompts.com. We have covered everything from triple monitor ergonomics in episode 587 to the future of broadcast TV in episode 746. There is a search bar there too, so if you have a specific tech headache, chances are we have talked about it.
And if you have a prompt of your own, like Daniel did, there's a contact form on the website. We love getting these questions from friends and listeners alike.
Well, I think we have covered the bases for this one. I hope the situation in Israel stays as safe as possible for Daniel and his family.
Me too, Herman. Thanks for the technical deep dive. This has been My Weird Prompts. I am Corn Poppleberry.
And I am Herman Poppleberry. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you in the next one.
Stay safe out there, everyone. Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my